19-year-old millionaire Alexander Sterling III laughs as fraud victims describe losing their life savings in his cryptocurrency scam. He mocks families in court, treating their pain like entertainment. But what Judge Caprio does next will remind you that money doesn't buy respect and that arrogance has consequences. This is Alexander Sterling's story, and it shows what happens when entitlement meets real authority in a courtroom, where character matters more than your bank account. Before we begin, subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're watching from, because we all know someone who thinks rules don't apply to them. The morning air in Providence, Rhode Island carries an unusual tension as October sunlight filters through the tall windows of the Providence County Superior Court. It is October 15th, 2024, and the marble corridors echo with hushed conversations and the shuffling of anxious feet. Today marks a pivotal moment in what has become one of the most closely watched fraud cases in recent memory. The courtroom itself feels charged with anticipation. Every seat in the gallery is occupied, creating a sea of faces that represents far more than mere curiosity seekers. These are families whose lives have been shattered, journalists documenting what many hope will be a landmark case, and members of the community who have followed the Sterling scandal since it first broke 6 months ago. The wooden benches creak under the weight of packed bodies, and the air conditioning struggles against the collective heat of human emotion and expectation. Behind the prosecution table, stacks of evidence boxes tower like monuments to meticulous investigation. Financial documents, printed emails, social media screenshots, and victim statements fill manila folders that represent months of painstaking work by federal investigators. The prosecution team moves with the quiet confidence of attorneys who know their case is ironclad, their preparation exhaustive. At the center of this legal theater sits the bench where the Honorable Judge Frank Caprio will preside. His reputation precedes him into every courtroom he enters. For decades, Judge Caprio has been known throughout Rhode Island and beyond as a jurist who combines wisdom with compassion, fairness with firmness. His approach to justice has earned him respect across all social and economic lines, from the humblest defendants to the most powerful attorneys. Those who appear before him know they will receive a fair hearing, but they also know that respect for the court and for the victims of crime is not negotiable. Judge Caprio's judicial philosophy centers on the belief that every person who enters his courtroom deserves dignity, whether they are victim or defendant. He has seen every type of case imaginable, from minor traffic violations to major felonies, and his response to each reflects a deep understanding of human nature and the complexities of justice. His colleagues describe him as a judge who listens more than he speaks, who considers the human impact of every decision, and who never forgets that behind every case file are real people with real lives affected by the proceedings. The case before the court today represents everything Judge Caprio has spent his career fighting against. People versus Alexander Sterling III is not merely about financial fraud. It is about the deliberate exploitation of trust, the calculated targeting of vulnerable families, and the complete absence of remorse from someone who used privilege as a weapon against those who had none. Alexander Sterling III stands accused of orchestrating what federal investigators have called one of the most sophisticated and heartless cryptocurrency fraud schemes in recent history. The charges paint a picture of calculated deception that spanned 18 months and destroyed the financial security of over 200 families across New England. The scheme, marketed under the name Future Coin, promised guaranteed returns of 30% annually through what Sterling claimed was revolutionary blockchain technology. The mechanics of the fraud were as simple as they were devastating. Sterling used his family's reputation in the tech industry and his own carefully cultivated social media presence to build credibility with potential investors. His Instagram account, with over 2 million followers, showcased a lifestyle of luxury cars, private jets, and exclusive parties. But rather than simply flaunting wealth, Sterling strategically used his platform to present himself as a young entrepreneur, sharing investment opportunities with ordinary families. The targeting was deliberate and cruel. Sterling's marketing team, hired through shell companies to maintain plausible deniability, focused their advertising on middle-class neighborhoods, community colleges, and social media groups where working families discussed financial planning. The advertisements promised that future coin represented a chance for regular people to achieve the kind of financial security previously available only to the wealthy. Sterling Tech Industries, the family company founded by Alexander's grandfather in the 1970s, had built its reputation on legitimate software development and technology consulting. The company's success had made the Sterling family one of Rhode Island's most prominent dynasties, with holdings in real estate, venture capital, and emerging technologies. This legitimate business success provided the perfect cover for Alexander's fraudulent scheme, as potential investors saw the family name as a guarantee of credibility. The victims gathered in today's courtroom represent a cross-section of American families who believed they were making smart financial decisions. Maria Gonzalez, a single mother working 2 jobs to support her teenage daughter, invested her entire college savings fund after seeing Sterling's testimonials from supposedly successful investors. Robert Chen, a retired high school math teacher, committed his pension savings to FutureCoin after Sterling's team provided him with detailed financial projections that appeared legitimate. The Kowalski family, owners of a small construction business, invested the loan money they had secured to expand their company, trusting that Sterling's guaranteed returns would allow them to grow their business while maintaining financial security. Each victim's story follows a similar pattern of careful manipulation. Sterling's organization provided professional-looking websites, fake testimonials from satisfied investors, and fabricated documentation showing consistent profits. When investors expressed concerns or asked detailed questions, Sterling himself would often call them personally, using his charm and apparent expertise to reassure them. He spoke knowledgeably about blockchain technology, cryptocurrency markets, and investment strategies, creating an illusion of competence that masked the complete absence of any legitimate investment activity. The investigation that brought Sterling to this courtroom began when Maria Gonzalez attempted to withdraw funds to pay her daughter's first semester tuition. When FutureCoin's customer service department repeatedly delayed her withdrawal with increasingly elaborate excuses, she contacted the state attorney general's office. What investigators initially assumed was a simple case of business mismanagement quickly revealed itself to be a massive fraud operation with victims across multiple states. Federal agents executing search warrants on Sterling's properties discovered that none of the promised cryptocurrency investments had ever been made. Instead, the $15 million collected from investors had been spent on Sterling's personal expenses, including luxury cars, designer clothing, expensive vacations, and payments to social media influencers who helped promote the scheme. The sophisticated financial projections and profit reports sent to investors were completely fabricated, created by graphic designers hired to make fictional documents appear authentic. As morning turns to midday and the courtroom fills to capacity, the stage is set for a confrontation between 2 very different worldviews. On one side sits Alexander Sterling III, a young man who has never faced real consequences for his actions, surrounded by the best legal representation money can buy. On the other side stand the families he has devastated, represented by prosecutors who understand that this case is about far more than financial crime. It is about whether justice can truly be blind to wealth and status, and whether someone who has spent his entire life believing rules do not apply to him can finally be held accountable for the pain he has caused others. Alexander Sterling III enters the courtroom like he owns it. At 19 years old, he carries himself with the practiced arrogance of someone who has never been told no, never faced consequences, and never encountered a problem that money could not solve. His physical presence commands attention, though not in the way his expensive image consultants intended. Every detail of his appearance has been carefully calculated to project wealth and status, from the handmade Italian leather shoes that cost more than most families spend on groceries in 6 months, to the platinum watch that gleams under the courtroom's fluorescent lights. His suit is a masterpiece of tailoring, cut from fabric that feels like silk and fits his lean frame with mathematical precision. The navy blue wool bears the subtle sheen that only comes from materials worth thousands of dollars per yard. The jacket's lapels are perfectly pressed, the shoulders sit exactly where they should, and the trouser cuffs break at precisely the right point above his shoes. Everything about his attire communicates one message: I am untouchable because I am valuable. Sterling's hair has been styled by professionals who charge more per hour than many people earn in a week. Each strand sits in calculated casual perfection, creating the illusion of effortless good looks while actually representing hours of careful grooming. His skin bears the healthy glow of someone who has never worked outdoors, never stressed about paying bills, and has access to the finest skincare treatments money can provide. His manicured fingernails shine with clear polish, and his teeth display the perfect whiteness that comes from a lifetime of expensive dental care. But it is Sterling's demeanor that truly defines him. He surveys the courtroom with the casual assessment of someone touring a property he might purchase. His pale blue eyes move across the faces of his victims with no recognition of their humanity, no acknowledgement of their pain. When his gaze settles on the prosecution table, his lips curve into a barely perceptible smirk that suggests he finds the entire proceeding amusing rather than threatening. Sterling's movements betray his complete disconnection from the gravity of the situation. He adjusts his tie with the same casual indifference he might show when deciding which restaurant to visit for lunch. When he sits, he leans back in his chair with the relaxed posture of someone attending a social gathering rather than facing felony charges. His long fingers drum silently against the defense table's surface, not from nervousness, but from boredom. The phone in Sterling's hand serves as both prop and symbol of his priorities. Throughout the preliminary proceedings, he scrolls through social media feeds with a focused attention that should be directed toward the legal proceedings determining his future. His thumbs move across the screen with practiced efficiency, liking posts from friends vacationing in exotic locations, commenting on luxury car reviews, and maintaining the online persona that helped facilitate his crimes. Even in a courtroom, where his freedom hangs in the balance, Sterling cannot resist the urge to cultivate his digital image. Sterling's background reads like a case study in privilege without responsibility. Born into the Sterling family fortune, he has spent his entire life surrounded by people whose job it was to solve his problems and smooth over his mistakes. From exclusive private schools where large donations ensured academic success despite mediocre effort, to elite universities where family connections open doors that merit alone never could, Sterling has navigated a world where consequences were always negotiable and rules always had exceptions. His childhood was a succession of expensive toys and exotic experiences designed to impress rather than educate. Private jets to European vacations, box seats at professional sporting events, and access to celebrities and politicians created a bubble of unreality where Sterling learned to view ordinary people as background characters in his personal entertainment. Nannies, tutors, and household staff catered to his every whim, while his parents focused on business dealings and social obligations that took precedence over parenting. The Sterling family's approach to raising their heir involved substituting money for guidance, gifts for attention, and legal representation for accountability. When teenage Alexander was caught cheating on standardized tests, the family hired specialists to ensure the incident disappeared from his record. When he crashed expensive cars due to reckless driving, new vehicles appeared without discussion of responsibility or consequences. When he was accused of plagiarizing academic work, family lawyers negotiated settlements that protected his reputation while ignoring the underlying character issues. Sterling's social media presence, which became central to his fraudulent scheme, began as an extension of his narcissistic personality rather than a calculated business strategy. His Instagram account documented a lifestyle of conspicuous consumption that most people could only imagine. Photos of private yacht parties, designer shopping sprees, and exclusive nightclub appearances created a carefully curated fantasy of endless wealth and constant pleasure. The millions of followers who admired his lifestyle had no idea they were viewing the preparation for their own financial destruction. The psychology behind Sterling's criminal behavior reveals a young man who has never developed empathy, accountability, or any understanding of other people's struggles. His worldview divides humanity into two categories: those who matter because they have wealth and status, and those who exist to serve the needs and desires of the first group. The families he defrauded fell clearly into the second category, making their financial destruction not a moral concern, but simply a necessary step in maintaining his preferred lifestyle. Sterling's relationship with truth is purely transactional. Facts are useful when they serve his purposes and irrelevant when they do not. Throughout the investigation leading to his arrest, he demonstrated a remarkable ability to lie with complete conviction, not because he was skilled at deception, but because he genuinely believed that reality should conform to his preferences rather than the other way around. When presented with evidence of his crimes, his first instinct was not to feel guilt, but to feel annoyed that people were making such a serious matter out of what he considered a minor business disagreement. The three attorneys flanking Sterling at the defense table represent the finest legal talent that money can procure. Their strategy combines technical challenges to evidence collection with character assassination of the victims, painting Sterling as a naive young man who made mistakes rather than a calculating predator who deliberately targeted vulnerable families. The legal team's presence serves as both protection and prop, reinforcing Sterling's belief that every problem has a solution if you hire the right professionals and pay them enough money. Sterling's body language throughout the proceedings reveals his fundamental misunderstanding of his situation. While his victims struggle with emotions ranging from grief to rage, Sterling displays the detached curiosity of someone watching a moderately interesting television program. He whispers to his attorneys not out of concern for his defense, but to share observations about the people around him, commenting on their appearance, their obvious financial status, and their dramatic reactions to what he considers an overblown situation. As the formal proceedings prepare to begin, Sterling embodies everything that is wrong with a system that allows wealth to insulate people from the consequences of their actions. His presence in the courtroom represents not just one young man's crimes, but an entire culture of entitlement that views other people's pain as acceptable collateral damage in the pursuit of personal pleasure. Judge Caprio's response to this attitude will determine whether justice can truly be blind to bank account balances and whether character can ultimately triumph over cash. The moment Maria Gonzalez rises from her seat in the gallery, the courtroom's atmosphere shifts from formal proceedings to raw human emotion. Her hands shake as she approaches the witness stand, clutching a manila folder containing documents that represent the destruction of her family's future. The single mother's voice wavers as she begins to describe how Alexander Sterling's cryptocurrency scheme consumed her daughter's entire college fund. $50,000 saved over 15 years of working double shifts at a local diner and cleaning offices on weekends. Maria's testimony unfolds with heartbreaking simplicity. She explains how Sterling's professional-looking website and personal phone calls convinced her that FutureCoin represented a safe investment that would grow her daughter's college money while protecting it from inflation. Her voice breaks when she describes the moment she realized the money was gone, how she had to tell her 17-year-old daughter that the university acceptance letter they had celebrated together meant nothing without the funds to pay tuition. Sterling's reaction to this testimony reveals the depth of his disconnection from human suffering, as Maria describes working extra shifts to rebuild even a fraction of the lost savings. Sterling rolls his eyes with theatrical exaggeration. The gesture is subtle enough that the jury might miss it, but obvious enough that several people in the gallery notice immediately. When Maria pauses to compose herself, clearly struggling with the emotional weight of reliving her financial destruction, Sterling turns to one of his attorneys and whispers something that makes the lawyer shake his head in disapproval. The disrespect escalates when Robert Chen takes the witness stand. The retired mathematics teacher speaks with the measured precision of someone who has spent decades explaining complex concepts to teenagers, but his composure cannot hide the devastation in his voice. Robert describes how Sterling's team provided detailed financial projections and mathematical models that appeared to demonstrate the safety and profitability of the FutureCoin investment. As a math teacher, Robert believed he understood the numbers well enough to make an informed decision about investing his pension savings. Sterling's response to Robert's testimony crosses the line from inappropriate to cruel. When the retired teacher explains how the loss of his $80,000 investment has forced him to take a part-time job at age 70 to afford basic living expenses, Sterling actually chuckles audibly. The sound cuts through the courtroom like a blade, causing several jurors to turn and stare at the defendant in disbelief. Sterling appears completely unaware that his reaction is inappropriate, treating Robert's suffering like entertainment rather than tragedy. Judge Caprio's first intervention comes as a quiet but unmistakable warning. He removes his reading glasses with deliberate slowness, a gesture that anyone familiar with his courtroom recognizes as a sign of mounting displeasure. His voice carries the authority of decades on the bench when he addresses the defense table directly. The words are measured and professional, but they carry an undertone of steel that makes clear his expectations for courtroom behavior. Sterling's response to judicial authority reveals his fundamental misunderstanding of power dynamics. Rather than showing appropriate respect for the court's warning, he shrugs with casual indifference, as if Judge Caprio's concern is merely one person's opinion rather than a direct order from the presiding authority. This dismissive gesture sends a ripple of shock through the courtroom, where most observers understand that disrespecting Judge Caprio is both legally dangerous and morally inexcusable. The situation deteriorates further when the Kowalski family begins their victim impact statement. Tom and Susan Kowalski built their small construction business through 25 years of hard work, gradually earning enough success to consider expansion. Their decision to invest their business loan money in Sterling's scheme represented not greed, but careful planning for their family's future. The $120,000 they lost was not disposable income, but the foundation for hiring additional workers and purchasing equipment that would have allowed their business to grow. Sterling's behavior during the Kowalski testimony reaches new levels of callousness. As Tom Kowalski describes having to lay off employees because the business expansion money disappeared, Sterling checks his phone with obvious boredom. When Susan Kowalski breaks down while explaining how they might lose their family business entirely, Sterling yawns dramatically, stretching his arms above his head like someone enduring a particularly dull lecture. The collective impact of these displays of disrespect creates a palpable tension in the courtroom. Observers in the gallery begin exchanging shocked glances and whispered comments about Sterling's behavior. Several family members of other victims clench their fists or lean forward in their seats, their anger at Sterling's attitude becoming increasingly difficult to contain. The prosecution team watches these interactions with growing confidence, understanding that Sterling is destroying his own case more effectively than any evidence they could present. Judge Caprio's second warning carries significantly more weight than his first. He sets down his pen with deliberate precision and fixes Sterling with a stare that has intimidated far more experienced defendants than this entitled teenager. The judge's voice drops to a lower register, creating the kind of quiet intensity that demands attention rather than commanding it. His words about the court's expectation of respect for victims and proceedings carry the weight of moral authority earned through decades of fair but firm judicial leadership. Sterling's reaction to this escalated warning demonstrates his complete inability to read social situations or understand consequences. Instead of the appropriate response of apologetic attention, he mutters something under his breath that sounds suspiciously like a complaint about the proceedings taking too long. The comment is quiet enough to maintain plausible deniability, but loud enough for several people to hear, including Judge Caprio, whose expression hardens almost imperceptibly. The whispered conversations between Sterling and his legal team reveal the growing frustration of attorneys who understand that their client is sabotaging his own defense. The lawyers lean in repeatedly to offer guidance about appropriate courtroom behavior, but Sterling responds to their advice with the same dismissive attitude he shows everyone else. His body language suggests that he views his own attorneys as employees who should solve his problems without requiring his cooperation or behavioral modifications. As victim after victim describes the devastating impact of Sterling's crimes, his pattern of disrespectful behavior becomes increasingly obvious to everyone in the courtroom. He treats each testimony like an interruption of his personal time, rather than an account of real human suffering caused by his deliberate actions. His sighs of impatience, checks of his expensive watch, and obvious attention to his phone create a stark contrast with the genuine emotion being displayed by his victims. The mounting tension in the courtroom reflects a fundamental clash between two worldviews. The victims and their families understand that they are participating in a sacred process of justice, where truth is spoken and accountability is demanded. Sterling approaches the same proceedings as an inconvenience that money and privilege should be able to resolve quickly and quietly. This collision of perspectives creates an atmosphere where conflict becomes inevitable, and Judge Caprio's patience approaches its limits. The stage is now set for an escalation that will test whether Sterling's lifetime of avoiding consequences has prepared him for an encounter with true authority, or whether his arrogance will finally meet its match in a courtroom where character matters more than cash. Judge Caprio's transformation begins subtly, like storm clouds gathering on a clear horizon. He removes his reading glasses for the third time in 20 minutes, but this gesture carries different weight than his previous warnings. The elderly judge's weathered hands move with deliberate precision as he sets the glasses on his desk, creating a moment of silence that resonates through the packed courtroom. When he looks up at Sterling, his eyes carry the accumulated wisdom of decades spent witnessing human nature at its best and worst. The judge's voice, when it comes, has dropped to a register that court veterans recognize as dangerous territory. There is no shouting, no theatrical displays of anger. Instead, Judge Caprio speaks with the quiet intensity of someone who has reached the limits of his considerable patience. His words about respect for victims and the dignity of court proceedings carry the weight of moral authority that cannot be purchased, inherited, or negotiated away. Sterling's response to this escalated judicial warning reveals the depth of his disconnection from reality. Rather than recognizing the gravity of his situation, he treats Judge Caprio's intervention as another minor inconvenience in a day filled with boring delays. His posture remains relaxed, almost lounging in his chair, while his expensive fingers drum against the defense table with obvious impatience. The fake apology that follows his attorney's urgent whispered advice carries all the sincerity of a customer service script, delivered with the same tone he might use to placate a restaurant server who brought the wrong wine. The courtroom holds its collective breath as Sterling's behavior continues to deteriorate. Within minutes of his insincere apology, he returns to his pattern of disrespectful conduct with renewed boldness. When the next victim begins describing how the loss of their retirement savings has forced them to move in with adult children, Sterling makes an exaggerated show of checking his platinum watch. The gesture is performed with theatrical obviousness, ensuring that everyone in the courtroom understands his opinion of their time's relative value. Judge Caprio's mounting frustration becomes visible in small but significant ways. His jaw tightens almost imperceptibly when Sterling's phone buzzes, and the young defendant actually glances at the screen during testimony. The judge's pen taps against his notepad in a rhythm that suggests barely controlled irritation. Court observers who have watched Judge Caprio for years recognize these warning signs as the prelude to judicial intervention that defendants remember for the rest of their lives. The situation reaches a critical turning point when Sterling's disrespect becomes impossible to ignore or excuse. As an elderly victim describes having to choose between prescription medications and adequate food because of the financial losses caused by Sterling's fraud, the defendant lets out an audible sigh of exasperation. The sound carries clearly through the courtroom's acoustics, creating a moment of shocked silence as observers process the callousness of the gesture. Sterling follows this display with an even more egregious breach of courtroom etiquette. He turns to his lead attorney and speaks in a stage whisper that is clearly intended to be heard by others in the courtroom. His comment about the proceedings being a waste of time that could be settled with proper legal maneuvering demonstrates not only disrespect for the victims, but complete contempt for the judicial process itself. Judge Caprio's response marks a fundamental shift in the courtroom's power dynamics. He stands slowly, his 70-year-old frame carrying the dignity of someone who has spent decades in service to justice. The simple act of rising transforms the atmosphere, creating a moment of absolute silence as everyone present recognizes that they are witnessing something significant. When Judge Caprio speaks, his voice carries the authority of law itself, backed by the moral weight of a lifetime spent defending the rights of ordinary people against those who would exploit them. The threat of contempt of court hangs in the air like a sword, but Sterling's reaction demonstrates his fundamental inability to recognize genuine authority when it confronts him. Instead of the appropriate response of immediate apology and behavioral correction, he meets Judge Caprio's warning with a smirk that suggests he finds the entire situation amusing rather than threatening. The expression on his face communicates clearly that he views the judge's authority as negotiable, another obstacle that money and privilege can eventually overcome. Sterling's defense team recognizes the disaster unfolding before them and attempts desperate damage control. The lead attorney rises quickly, beginning what is clearly intended to be an apology on behalf of his client. But Sterling interrupts with a gesture that dismisses both his lawyer's concerns and the court's authority. The young defendant's body language suggests that he considers his attorney's alarm to be an overreaction to what he sees as a minor social misunderstanding rather than a serious legal crisis. The social embarrassment building in the courtroom becomes palpable as Sterling's behavior continues to deteriorate. Members of the gallery, many of whom are victims' family members, begin to show visible signs of anger and disgust. Whispered comments about Sterling's character circulate through the packed seating area, while journalists frantically take notes on every gesture and expression. The media presence ensures that Sterling's courtroom conduct will be documented and disseminated far beyond the confines of this single proceeding. Sterling's loss of control becomes evident not in dramatic outbursts, but in his increasing inability to maintain even the pretense of appropriate behavior. His expensive facade begins to crack as the stress of sustained attention and criticism pushes him beyond his comfort zone. The young man who has spent his entire life surrounded by people paid to accommodate his wishes suddenly finds himself in an environment where his preferences and attitudes carry no weight. The turning point arrives when Judge Caprio directly addresses Sterling's pattern of disrespectful behavior. The judge's words are carefully chosen and legally precise, but they carry an emotional weight that transcends mere procedural correction. He speaks not just as a judicial officer enforcing courtroom rules, but as a moral authority confronting behavior that violates fundamental principles of human decency and respect. Sterling's response to this direct confrontation reveals the bankruptcy of his character and the complete failure of his privileged upbringing to instill basic values of respect and empathy. Instead of recognizing the gravity of his situation or showing any awareness of the pain he has caused, he doubles down on his attitude of superior indifference. His facial expression and body language communicate clearly that he considers himself above the concerns of ordinary people and immune to the consequences that apply to everyone else. The courtroom observers witness this exchange with growing amazement and anger. The contrast between Judge Caprio's dignified authority and Sterling's juvenile arrogance creates a stark illustration of the conflict between earned respect and inherited privilege. The tension building in the room suggests that this confrontation is approaching a climax that will determine whether justice can triumph over wealth and whether character can prevail over cash. As the escalation continues, it becomes clear that Sterling has fundamentally misunderstood his situation and overestimated his immunity from consequences. His lifetime of buying his way out of problems has not prepared him for an encounter with someone whose authority derives from moral conviction rather than financial leverage. The call for Alexander Sterling III to take the witness stand creates a moment of electric anticipation in the packed courtroom. His defense attorneys exchange worried glances, their whispered conference revealing deep concerns about putting their arrogant client under oath. But Sterling himself appears eager for the opportunity, rising from his chair with the confident swagger of someone who believes his charm and intelligence can overcome any challenge. His expensive shoes click against the marble floor as he approaches the witness stand, each step taken with the casual assurance of someone walking into his own boardroom rather than facing federal prosecutors armed with mountains of evidence. Sterling's approach to the witness stand resembles a performance more than legal testimony. He adjusts his designer tie with practiced precision, smooths his perfectly styled hair, and surveys the courtroom like an actor taking the stage before an appreciative audience. When he places his hand on the Bible for the oath, his smirk suggests he views the solemn ritual as quaint theater rather than sacred commitment to truth. The words of the oath pass his lips with mechanical precision, but his tone carries none of the gravity that such promises deserve. His posture in the witness chair communicates supreme confidence bordering on arrogance. Sterling leans back comfortably, one arm draped casually over the chair's side, projecting the relaxed authority of someone accustomed to commanding rooms full of people. His pale blue eyes sweep across the faces of his victims' families with the detached assessment of someone evaluating furniture, rather than acknowledging human beings whose lives he has destroyed. When his gaze settles on the prosecution table, his expression suggests mild amusement rather than concern about the legal battle ahead. The prosecution's cross-examination begins with methodical precision, each question designed to reveal the calculated nature of Sterling's criminal enterprise. The lead prosecutor's voice carries professional calm as she guides Sterling through the timeline of his fraudulent scheme, from its conception to its devastating execution. Her questions are surgical in their precision, designed to strip away the layers of justification and self-deception that Sterling has built around his actions. Sterling's responses reveal a young man completely divorced from moral reality. When asked about his decision to target middle-class families rather than wealthy investors, he speaks with the casual indifference of someone discussing marketing demographics for luxury products. His explanation that working families were more likely to trust his testimonials because they wanted to believe in financial opportunities carries no awareness of the cruel manipulation involved in exploiting hope and desperation. The prosecution presses deeper, forcing Sterling to confront the human cost of his actions. When asked about Maria Gonzalez specifically, Sterling's response demonstrates breathtaking callousness. He describes her as a typical investor who failed to understand the risks involved in cryptocurrency speculation. His characterization of her 15 years of careful saving as naive financial planning reveals a worldview where ordinary people's struggles are viewed as personal failings, rather than circumstances deserving respect and protection. Sterling's testimony about Robert Chen proves even more damaging to his character. When confronted with the fact that he personally called the retired teacher to provide false reassurances about investment safety, Sterling shows no recognition of the trust he violated. Instead, he frames his deceptive phone calls as the customer service, describing how he took time from his busy schedule to address concerns from worried investors. His inability to see the moral difference between honest communication and calculated manipulation exposes the vacuum where his conscience should exist. The courtroom's atmosphere grows increasingly tense as Sterling's testimony reveals the depth of his moral bankruptcy. His description of the Kowalski family's investment as a business decision that failed to generate expected returns ignores entirely the fact that their money was never invested at all, but simply stolen to fund his lavish lifestyle. When pressed about where their funds actually went, Sterling becomes defensive, but not apologetic, treating questions about accountability as personal attacks rather than legitimate inquiries about criminal behavior. Sterling's admission that he deliberately targeted people he considered gullible represents a moment of stunning honesty about his predatory mindset. He explains his marketing strategy with the detached professionalism of someone discussing legitimate business practices, apparently unaware that he is confessing to deliberately exploiting vulnerable people. His description of working families as easy targets because they lack sophisticated financial knowledge reveals a contempt for ordinary people that shocks even observers prepared for his arrogance. The prosecution's questioning intensifies as they force Sterling to confront specific victims whose lives he has destroyed. When asked about families who have lost their homes due to his fraud, Sterling responds with irritation rather than remorse. He suggests that people who invest money they cannot afford to lose deserve whatever consequences follow, displaying a victim-blaming mentality that reduces human suffering to poor personal choices. Sterling's characterization of his victims' financial losses as exaggerated sob stories represents the climactic moment of his moral revelation. His dismissive wave as he describes their testimony as theatrical performance designed to generate sympathy exposes the complete absence of empathy that enabled his crimes. The casual cruelty of suggesting that people are lying about their suffering to gain public sympathy demonstrates a level of narcissism that makes genuine remorse impossible. The devastating impact of Sterling's testimony becomes apparent as he continues to dig his legal grave deeper with every answer. His complaint that the prosecution is making too much of what he considers a minor business dispute reveals his fundamental inability to grasp the gravity of his situation. When he suggests that sophisticated investors would have understood the risks involved, he ignores the fact that his elaborate deception was specifically designed to prevent any real understanding of those risks. Sterling's direct assault on his victims reaches its peak when he addresses Maria Gonzalez's financial struggles with breathtaking insensitivity. His suggestion that she should have worked harder to afford her daughter's college education rather than relying on investments demonstrates a profound misunderstanding of both her circumstances and his own criminal responsibility. The casual dismissal of 15 years of sacrifice and careful planning as insufficient effort reveals the privileged mindset that views other people's struggles as personal failings. His comments about Robert Chen's retirement situation prove equally callous and self-incriminating. Sterling's assertion that retirement security is not guaranteed anyway ignores his role in destroying what the teacher had spent decades building. His suggestion that older people should expect financial uncertainty reveals an attitude toward elderly victims that borders on predatory targeting of vulnerable populations. The courtroom watches in fascination as Sterling's testimony transforms from self-defense into self-destruction. Each answer reveals new depths of callousness while providing prosecutors with evidence of criminal intent and complete lack of remorse. His inability to recognize the inappropriateness of his responses suggests a disconnect from reality that makes rehabilitation unlikely and punishment necessary. The climactic moment arrives when Sterling makes his fatal mistake of addressing Judge Caprio directly with the same condescending tone he has used throughout his testimony. His words about the victims knowing the risks carry an underlying challenge to judicial authority that crosses the final line between disrespect and contempt. The smirk that accompanies his statement communicates clearly that he has no respect for the court, the process, or the suffering he has caused. The transformation that overtakes Judge Caprio in this moment transcends the ordinary dynamics of courtroom authority. He rises from his bench with the deliberate movement of someone who has reached a profound decision, not merely about legal proceedings, but about the fundamental nature of justice itself. The 70-year-old jurist's weathered frame seems to expand with moral authority as he stands, creating a presence that fills the entire courtroom despite his modest physical stature. The silence that follows his movement is absolute, as if the very air has been charged with the weight of impending judgment. When Judge Caprio speaks, his voice carries the accumulated wisdom of decades spent witnessing human nature in all its forms. There is no anger in his tone, no theatrical display of judicial fury. Instead, his words emerge with the quiet force of bedrock truth, each syllable carefully measured and precisely delivered. The courtroom strains to hear every word, understanding instinctively that they are witnessing a moment of moral reckoning that will resonate far beyond these walls. Judge Caprio's opening words cut through Sterling's facade with surgical precision. He speaks directly to the young defendant, his voice carrying the weight of someone who has spent a lifetime distinguishing between genuine remorse and calculated performance. The judge's assessment of Sterling's testimony does not focus on legal technicalities or procedural violations, but on the fundamental revelation of character that is unfolded before the court. His words acknowledge that Sterling has indeed revealed who he truly is, stripping away any pretense of youthful mistake or misguided judgment. The judge's detailed examination of Sterling's crimes moves beyond mere recitation of charges to explore the psychological and moral dimensions of deliberate cruelty. Judge Caprio describes how Sterling methodically identified vulnerable families, studied their hopes and fears, and then crafted elaborate deceptions specifically designed to exploit their trust. His analysis reveals understanding that this was not random criminal behavior, but calculated predation that required intimate knowledge of human psychology and complete absence of moral restraint. Judge Caprio's voice grows stronger as he addresses the systematic nature of Sterling's exploitation. He describes how the defendant used his family's legitimate business reputation as a weapon against people who had no reason to doubt his credibility. The judge's words paint a picture of betrayal that goes beyond simple fraud to encompass a fundamental violation of the social contract that allows communities to function. His description of Sterling's crimes emphasizes not just the financial damage, but the destruction of trust that affects victims' ability to participate in normal economic relationships. The courtroom listens in rapt attention as Judge Caprio dissects Sterling's testimony with the precision of someone who has spent decades evaluating human character under oath. He addresses each callous statement, each dismissive gesture, each moment where Sterling revealed his contempt for his victim's suffering. The judge's analysis demonstrates that Sterling's behavior was not the result of poor legal advice or courtroom nerves, but the authentic expression of a worldview that reduces other human beings to opportunities for personal enrichment. Judge Caprio's examination of Sterling's victim-blaming strategies reveals deep understanding of how predators justify their actions to themselves and others. He explains how Sterling's characterization of his victims as naive or greedy serves to deflect responsibility while maintaining the fiction that his actions were somehow justified. The judge's words expose the circular logic that allows criminals to blame their victims for trusting them, creating a moral framework where exploitation becomes the victim's fault for being exploitable. The transformation in Sterling's demeanor begins subtly, but becomes increasingly obvious as Judge Caprio's words penetrate his defensive arrogance. The smirk that has characterized his expression throughout the proceedings starts to waver, replaced by confusion and the first glimmers of genuine concern. His body language shifts from relaxed confidence to growing tension, as he begins to understand that his usual strategies for avoiding consequences may not work in this environment. Judge Caprio's discussion of privilege and responsibility strikes at the heart of Sterling's worldview with devastating accuracy. The judge explains how true privilege creates obligation rather than immunity, how genuine leadership requires service rather than exploitation. His words contrast the hollow entitlement that Sterling represents with the authentic authority that comes from moral character and service to others. The comparison exposes Sterling's fundamental misunderstanding of power and respect, revealing that he has confused fear and financial dependence with genuine regard. The judge's analysis extends beyond Sterling's individual crimes to address the broader social implications of allowing wealth to shield people from accountability. Judge Caprio speaks with the authority of someone who has witnessed countless cases where money was used to purchase immunity from consequences, and his words carry the weight of accumulated frustration with a system that too often treats justice as a commodity rather than a principle. His discussion of equal treatment under law emphasizes that the blindfolded figure of justice must remain truly blind to wealth and status. Sterling's psychological defenses begin to crumble as Judge Caprio's relentless moral logic strips away each layer of justification and self-deception. The young defendant's confusion becomes visible as he struggles to understand why his usual combination of charm, money, and legal representation is failing to protect him. His expensive attorneys can only watch helplessly as their client's worldview collides with an authority that cannot be purchased or negotiated. The revelation dawning on Sterling's face represents more than simple fear of legal consequences. For perhaps the first time in his 19 years, he is encountering someone whose respect cannot be bought, whose authority derives from moral conviction rather than financial leverage. Judge Caprio's words force Sterling to confront the possibility that his actions have consequences that extend beyond temporary inconvenience or financial penalty. Judge Caprio's explanation of how Sterling exploited basic human decency reveals the judge's deep understanding of both criminal psychology and victim vulnerability. He describes how the defendant weaponized trust, hope, and financial anxiety to manipulate families who were simply trying to build better futures for their children. The judge's words emphasize that Sterling's crimes required not just greed, but active cruelty, deliberate exploitation of the very virtues that make communities possible. The courtroom watches in fascination as Sterling's arrogance finally encounters an immovable moral force. His lifetime of avoiding consequences through wealth and privilege has not prepared him for this moment of absolute accountability. The recognition spreading across his features suggests that he is beginning to understand that Judge Caprio represents something beyond ordinary judicial authority, something that cannot be influenced by family connections or expensive legal representation. Judge Caprio's concluding words about character and consequence create a moment of absolute clarity in the crowded courtroom. His explanation that privilege should create responsibility rather than immunity resonates with everyone present, from the victims seeking justice to the observers witnessing this confrontation between moral authority and entitled arrogance. The silence that follows his words carries the weight of truth, acknowledged, and justice approaching. The transformation is complete when Sterling's smirk finally disappears entirely, replaced by an expression of genuine fear and confusion that reveals the frightened teenager beneath the expensive facade. Judge Caprio's sentencing begins with a gravity that transforms the courtroom into something approaching a cathedral of justice. The elderly jurist's voice carries the weight of decades spent balancing mercy with accountability, understanding that the words he speaks will echo far beyond this single case. His opening remarks establish that the sentence about to be pronounced reflects not anger or vengeance, but the careful application of legal principles designed to protect society while offering the possibility of redemption to those willing to embrace it. The maximum prison term of 8 years federal incarceration strikes the courtroom like thunder. Judge Caprio's explanation of this sentence demonstrates his thorough consideration of federal sentencing guidelines, the scope of Sterling's crimes, and the complete absence of mitigating factors such as remorse or cooperation. The judge emphasizes that Sterling's youth, which might normally warrant consideration for reduced penalties, cannot overcome the calculated cruelty and extensive planning that characterized his criminal enterprise. Judge Caprio's detailed reasoning for the maximum sentence reveals his understanding that Sterling's crimes represent more than simple financial fraud. The judge explains how the defendant's deliberate targeting of vulnerable families, his use of sophisticated psychological manipulation, and his complete lack of remorse demonstrate a level of criminal sophistication that warrants the harshest available penalties. His words make clear that the sentence reflects not just the monetary damages, but the broader social harm caused by Sterling's destruction of trust and exploitation of basic human decency. The order for full restitution creates a moment of profound relief among the victims present in the courtroom. Judge Caprio's requirement that Sterling pay $15 million plus interest and penalties ensures that his victims will eventually recover their financial losses. Though the judge acknowledges that money cannot restore the sense of security and trust that Sterling destroyed, his explanation of the restitution order emphasizes that Sterling will bear the full cost of his crimes, including the additional financial burden created by delays in repayment. The asset forfeiture portion of the sentence strikes at the heart of Sterling's privileged lifestyle with surgical precision. Judge Caprio's order, freezing access to trust funds, seizing luxury vehicles, and confiscating expensive jewelry, represents more than financial penalty. The judge explains that these measures ensure Sterling cannot continue to benefit from his crimes, while his victims struggle with the consequences of his actions. The symbolic impact of stripping away the material symbols of Sterling's unearned privilege reinforces the message that consequences apply equally regardless of family wealth. The unique community service requirement reveals Judge Caprio's wisdom in crafting punishments that serve educational as well as punitive purposes. The judge's order that Sterling spend 200 hours working directly with financial literacy programs in underserved communities represents a carefully designed intervention intended to force the defendant to confront the human reality of the populations he exploited. Judge Caprio explains that this requirement will expose Sterling to families struggling with the same financial challenges faced by his victims, potentially fostering the empathy that his privileged upbringing failed to develop. Judge Caprio's reasoning behind the community service requirement demonstrates his belief in the possibility of genuine rehabilitation, even for defendants who have shown no evidence of remorse. The judge explains that direct contact with families similar to those Sterling defrauded may accomplish what neither wealth nor legal consequences could achieve by forcing him to see his victims as human beings, rather than statistical abstractions. The educational component of this sentence reflects Judge Caprio's understanding that true justice requires not just punishment, but the possibility of moral growth. The prohibition on social media access during the entire sentence period addresses the specific tools Sterling used to facilitate his crimes, while recognizing the role that digital platforms played in both his criminal methodology and his narcissistic worldview. Judge Caprio's explanation of this restriction emphasizes that Sterling's online presence was not merely a platform for self-promotion, but an integral component of his fraudulent scheme. The judge's words make clear that removing access to these tools serves both protective and corrective purposes. Judge Caprio's philosophical explanation of his sentencing decisions elevates the proceedings beyond mere legal technicality to address fundamental questions of justice and human responsibility. His words about Sterling's failure to understand the lives he destroyed carry the weight of someone who has spent decades witnessing both the worst and best of human nature. The judge's observation that privilege should create obligation rather than immunity resonates throughout the courtroom, as a principle that extends far beyond this single case. The judge's statement that character cannot be bought but can be learned represents the moral centerpiece of his sentencing philosophy. Judge Caprio explains that Sterling's lifetime of avoiding consequences through wealth and family connections has prevented him from developing the basic moral understanding that most people acquire through ordinary life experiences. His hope that meaningful service to others might accomplish what privilege prevented reflects a deep belief in the possibility of human growth, even under the most challenging circumstances. The courtroom's reaction to Judge Caprio's comprehensive sentence unfolds in waves of emotion that reflect the complex dynamics of justice being served. The victims' families experience visible relief as they realize that Sterling will face real consequences for his crimes and that their financial losses will eventually be restored. Their embraces and tears represent not celebration of another person's downfall, but gratitude that the legal system has recognized their suffering and responded with appropriate gravity. Sterling's reaction to the sentence reveals the complete collapse of his entitled worldview. The young man who entered the courtroom with supreme confidence in his immunity from consequences sits in stunned silence as the reality of 8 years in federal prison penetrates his consciousness. His expensive facade crumbles entirely as he struggles to process the transformation of his life from privileged indulgence to harsh accountability. The confusion and fear replacing his earlier arrogance suggests that this may be the first time in his 19 years that he has faced consequences he cannot avoid through wealth or family intervention. The broader courtroom reaction reflects the community's hunger for justice in cases where privilege has traditionally provided protection from accountability. Observers throughout the gallery nod in approval as Judge Caprio's words affirm that wealth cannot purchase immunity from moral responsibility. The presence of media representatives ensures that this moment of justice will be documented and shared, potentially influencing future cases where entitled defendants attempt to use privilege as a shield against consequences. Judge Caprio's concluding remarks about respect, dignity, and service create a framework for understanding justice that transcends the specifics of Sterling's case. His explanation that true respect must be earned through character rather than inherited through wealth provides a moral foundation that applies to all human relationships. The judge's emphasis on service to others as the path to genuine authority offers a blueprint for rehabilitation that could transform Sterling from predator to productive community member if he chooses to embrace it. The gavel's final strike creates a moment of absolute finality that seals Sterling's fate while opening the possibility for his eventual redemption through genuine service to others. The immediate aftermath of Judge Caprio's sentencing unfolds with the stark finality that accompanies true justice. Federal marshals approach Sterling's table with professional efficiency, their movements precise and unhurried as they prepare to execute the court's orders. The handcuffs that secure Sterling's wrists represent more than physical restraint. They symbolize the end of a lifetime spent believing that consequences were negotiable and accountability was optional. His designer suit, wrinkled now from stress and disbelief, loses its power to intimidate or impress as Sterling is led from the courtroom that has become the site of his complete downfall. Sterling's legal team sits in stunned silence as their client disappears through the courthouse doors that separate freedom from incarceration. The three high-powered attorneys who entered the case with confidence in their ability to minimize consequences through technical legal maneuvering now face the reality that their client's own testimony and behavior destroyed any possibility of mitigation. Their expensive briefcases and meticulous case files cannot overcome the fundamental truth that Sterling's character, revealed under oath and judicial scrutiny, made harsh punishment inevitable. The appeal process that Sterling's family immediately demands faces insurmountable obstacles created by their son's own courtroom conduct. Legal experts reviewing the case transcript find no procedural errors or constitutional violations that might justify overturning Judge Caprio's sentence. Sterling's detailed confession under oath, combined with his complete lack of remorse and his disrespectful behavior toward victims and court alike, creates an appellate record that reinforces rather than undermines the trial court's decisions. The very testimony that Sterling believed would demonstrate his sophistication instead provides appellate courts with clear evidence of his criminal intent and moral bankruptcy. The victim restitution process begins immediately following sentencing, though the complex task of liquidating Sterling's assets and recovering hidden funds will require months of forensic accounting and legal proceedings. Maria Gonzalez, Robert Chen, and the Kowalski family find themselves working with federal authorities to document their losses and establish priorities for repayment. While the promise of eventual financial recovery provides hope, the victims understand that the psychological scars left by Sterling's betrayal will heal more slowly than their bank accounts can be restored. The viral spread of courtroom footage captures public attention in ways that surprise even seasoned legal observers. Video clips of Sterling's arrogant testimony and disrespectful behavior generate millions of views across social media platforms, creating a cautionary tale that resonates far beyond the immediate legal community. Comment sections fill with expressions of outrage at Sterling's entitled attitude and admiration for Judge Caprio's principled response. The case becomes a touchstone for discussions about privilege, accountability, and the role of character in determining consequences. Judge Caprio's handling of the case elevates his reputation from regional respect to national recognition. Legal scholars analyze his sentencing decision as a masterclass in balancing punishment with rehabilitation, while social commentators praise his refusal to allow wealth and status to influence judicial proceedings. Speaking requests pour into his chambers from law schools, civic organizations, and judicial conferences seeking to learn from his approach to cases involving privileged defendants who have never faced real accountability. The broader legal community studies the Sterling case as an example of how judicial authority can effectively confront entitled behavior without compromising due process or fairness. Law professors assign the case transcript to students studying courtroom dynamics and the intersection of privilege with criminal justice. The contrast between Sterling's expectation of special treatment and Judge Caprio's insistence on equal application of law becomes a teaching tool for understanding how true judicial authority operates independently of social and economic pressures. Sterling's family business faces immediate consequences as customers and partners distance themselves from the scandal that has consumed their heir. Sterling Tech Industries, built over decades of legitimate work by previous generations, suffers reputation damage that threatens its continued viability. Board members demand leadership changes and complete separation from Alexander's legal troubles, while employees worry about job security in a company now associated with fraud and privilege abuse. The family's attempt to maintain business relationships requires public acknowledgement of their son's crimes and acceptance of his deserved punishment. Media coverage of the case evolves from simple crime reporting to broader social commentary about wealth inequality and justice in America. Editorial writers use Sterling's story to examine how extreme privilege can insulate young people from moral development while creating expectations of immunity from consequences. The case becomes a vehicle for discussing educational reform, parental responsibility, and the social obligations that should accompany inherited wealth and advantage. The long-term impact on Sterling's victims extends beyond financial recovery to include fundamental changes in how they approach trust and investment decisions. Maria Gonzalez's daughter ultimately attends college through a combination of scholarships, family sacrifice, and community support that emerges in response to media coverage of their situation. Robert Chen finds meaningful work teaching financial literacy to seniors, transforming his own victimization into service that helps others avoid similar exploitation. The Kowalski family rebuilds their construction business with renewed focus on serving their local community rather than pursuing rapid expansion. Sterling's incarceration in federal prison strips away the final vestiges of his privileged existence and forces confrontation with realities he has never faced. Prison officials assign him to general population rather than protective custody, requiring him to navigate social dynamics where wealth provides no advantage and respect must be earned through character and conduct. The humiliation of wearing prison uniforms, following institutional schedules, and accepting authority from corrections officers represents a complete reversal of his previous relationship with power and control. The community service requirement that will eventually follow Sterling's release creates anticipation among social service organizations working with financially vulnerable populations. Program directors prepare educational curricula designed to help Sterling understand the real-world impact of financial fraud, while contributing meaningfully to families struggling with economic challenges. The success of this rehabilitation effort will depend entirely on Sterling's willingness to embrace genuine change rather than simply enduring required service hours. Judge Caprio's wisdom in crafting Sterling's sentence becomes evident as the case's long-term effects demonstrate the power of principled judicial leadership. His refusal to accept Sterling's entitled behavior while maintaining hope for eventual rehabilitation creates a template for addressing privilege-related crimes that balances accountability with the possibility of redemption. The judge's emphasis on service as the path to genuine respect provides a framework that extends beyond criminal justice to encompass broader questions of social responsibility and character development. The Sterling case ultimately serves as a reminder that true authority derives from moral character rather than inherited advantage, and that justice, when properly administered, can triumph over wealth and privilege. Judge Caprio's handling of an entitled young criminal becomes a testament to the enduring power of principled leadership, and the possibility that even the most privileged defendants can learn accountability through genuine consequences and meaningful service to others. The courtroom where Sterling's arrogance met its match becomes a symbol of hope that character still matters more than cash in places where justice is administered with wisdom and courage.